Hi there, food friends. It's Kevin, and welcome to Cavalcade of Food. I'm back in the Cavalcade Cookbook Library, and so many of you enjoyed the kind of overview of the vintage Better Homes and Gardens cookbooks here in the library that I did a couple weeks ago. I'll put a little link to it up here if you want to watch that if you haven't already. And I had a number of requests to do some other ones, which I wanted to do, as we have so many of the real kind of classic American cookbooks here in the library, multiple editions from over the decades. And I'm talking about Joy of Cooking, I'm talking about Better Homes and Gardens, Good Housekeeping, and Betty Crocker. And I actually got probably more requests to talk about the Betty Crocker cookbooks than anything, so I wanted to do that. So here we are. And we're going to look at Betty Crocker cookbooks. And I will tell you that, Betty Crocker, not a real person. Duncan Hines, a real person. Fannie Farmer, a real person. So, our lore of American cookery is sort of peppered with these names that we've seen on books. Some of them are really corporate images that were created in the advertising department. And Betty Crocker is such a character. But you know what? We like to say Betty Crocker lives in all of us who like to cook and bake and provide meals for people we love. So, but Betty Crocker began as a spokesperson for gold medal flour. Now, here's an old gold medal flour cookbook published by the Washburn Crosby Company, which was the company that started making gold medal flour. Now, this cookbook is from 1917. There's no Betty Crocker in here. This predates her existence. Their slogan at the time was eventually gold medal flour, why not now? And because they were so assured that it was the best flour out there. And so, but Washburn Crosby over time became General Mills. And it was then that Betty Crocker came into being. And as a matter of fact, there was in the 1930s, there was a lot of radio programs that were cooking shows on the radio. Kind of hard to imagine. You couldn't see anything, but you had people telling you what to do and how to do it and tips in the kitchen. And Betty Crocker had a show at that time. Well, here's a gold medal flour booklet from Gold Medal's Gold Jubilee, 1880 to 1955. So when they had their 75th anniversary, they put out this booklet of recipes, and at the very bottom it says, "A treasury of favorite recipes modernized by Betty Crocker." So certainly by 1955, Betty Crocker was an icon in American cooking and marketing. So, and her image has changed over the years, and we'll see some examples of that as we go. So that's who Betty Crocker is. And the cookbook, I think, that probably really put the Betty Crocker name front and center, like we talked about the red and white gingham cover of the Better Homes and Gardens and what a hit that was. Well, Betty Crocker's first picture cookbook was probably the thing that people really took notice of. Now, Better Homes and Gardens was already out, but the Betty Crocker Picture Cookbook, this is a 1950 edition of the cookbook. And here it is in a binder, and just like Better Homes and Gardens. And this one's all taped up on the side, but it said Picture Cookbook because the idea was that this book not only was going to have all the great recipes, but it has lots and lots of wonderful photographs, most of which in these early books are in black and white, and it is loaded, just loaded with illustrations. And so, again, it has a 5-ring binder. It has tabs, how to do. So this is actually so, it seems elementary in some ways, but so significant also, like how to melt chocolate, how to prepare nuts, to chop them and toast them. I mean, things that people who have no experience in the kitchen would really want to know. Caramelizing sugar, dissolving gelatin, using a ring mold, all of these things. It had a whole chapter on sort of how-tos with photo illustrations, how to peel a tomato, okay? Really basic stuff, sure, but you know, again, a lot of people learned how to cook through these cookbooks. And while there was such a thing, raise your hand if you had home economics in school. I did, and I'm proud to say I got an A in home ec and I got an A in shop class. So there you go. But not everybody had home economics. Not everybody learned necessarily from their mother or grandmother about how to cook. And some people, when they went out on their own, really were kind of clueless in the kitchen. And that's why these books were so essential. And the Betty Crocker book really, like I said, with the emphasis on all these photographs and illustrations, is why it was called a picture cookbook. Then you've got meal planning, table service, appetizers, beverages, quick breads, yeast breads, cakes, frostings, cookies, desserts. And then you get into eggs and meat and fish, pies and salads, soups and sauces, vegetables and shortcuts. And of course, because it was really part of, here's somebody's bookmark, because it was published by General Mills, well, you know, all those pies and cakes and other desserts, guess what kind of flour they told you to use? Gold medal, that's right. So it was also really important for General Mills and marketing for this. And a lot of people said, oh, it says use gold medal flour, so that's what I'll use. I'll say, and I have them here too, Pillsbury did a cookbook for many years, and they did the same thing, and why wouldn't they? So here's a 1950 version. Now, unlike Better Homes and Gardens, which was available in the binder, here is a 1950 edition of the binder edition and the hardcover edition. So you could get this book in either format. And I believe the hardcover was a little less expensive. So again, same book, the pages are a bit smaller, but the layout is the same. Again, picture cookbook, just loaded with recipes. So that's 1950. And here is another one from 1950, but there's a hardcover edition. This one, down here, it says text edition. This one does not, but this one is the text edition. This was a textbook. This was used, this particular Betty Crocker book was specifically printed for use in cooking classes, home economic classes. It's a textbook, and it's a text edition. So it still has tons, it's still a picture cookbook, but it says text edition when they actually were using these in schools. And these were published, this particular series was published by McGraw-Hill Book Company and General Mills Incorporated. So anyways, there's the 1950s edition. And then you have a little bit of a later edition, same kind of basic cookbook here, but note on this. You see the difference? It's really mostly evident on the spine, how you can tell the later edition. You can see they reoriented sort of the little frill and the Betty Crocker picture cookbook. But it's a later printing of the 1950 edition of the cookbook. Okay. Now let's get into we go from the 50s to the 60s. So here's the next generation, and you'll notice this is Betty Crocker's new picture cookbook. So they stayed with the picture theme, and in order to emphasize that, they put photos all over this book so that you would know, yeah, it's full of pictures, all right. And on the inside, it sort of tells you on the inside cover what's new and exciting about this book, and basically why you should replace your old book with a new one. This is 1961, and again, it has very much, the tabs are now blue instead of sort of that cream color, but they really are very similar, if not exactly like the previous 1950 edition, and it starts with kitchen know-how. And again, there are some new things in here like making coffee and stuff like that. Very informative. And here I'm losing again. I gotta get some reinforcements for this. But that particular book I wanted to illustrate because if you look on the spine, it has a picture of Betty Crocker. And there she is. And so in this Betty Crocker cookbook, which is from 1956, I'm sorry, I went from 56 to 61. I meant to include this updated hardcover version. This is 1956. It has, at the very top of the spine, it has a illustration of Betty Crocker, which you'll notice she looks one way here in 1956 and another way here in 1961. So this shows you how they updated the look of Betty Crocker to keep current with, the style, the hairstyles, the fashions of the day. However, she's generally always in red, a red blazer with a white blouse. That tends to be sort of her uniform. But this is the next generation in the 50s, and then we go to that one in the 60s, the picture cookbook. And again, like the earlier edition, you could get this in the binder, or you could get this in the hardcover, whichever way you wanted it. And I will say that the way that the hardcovers were. A lot of hardcovers, it lays relatively flat on the counter, so it's not impossible to use like some books are. It was bound a little more loosely so that it could be used flat. And I also have in this series, let me see, this is 1961. Oh, here, I wanted to put these two next to each other. So these are both from 61. Again, you'll see at the top here, I've lost a page, it says text edition. See how it's somewhat different in terms of it's blue at the top instead of white, because this is the textbook edition of the Betty Crocker New Picture Cookbook 1961. And so that shows you a little bit more from that generation. And now we're going to go from the 60s to the 70s. And this was a widely popular edition. This is 1971. They redid the book in 69, and this is a I don't know, 8th printing maybe. So this was actually printed in 1971, but it's the 1969 edition of the Betty Crocker cookbook, and it's orange. And boy, they sold millions and millions of these. And again, we updated our portrait of Betty. There she is on the back, still in red and white. And you know how Santa Claus is red and white, and Betty Crocker is red and white. There's something about red and white that is like a advertising, because the red and white Santa Claus was a product of Coca-Cola and very much, and so I don't know what it is about red and white. If anybody knows, let me know. But Betty Crocker, there she is, updated for 19. She's in the swinging 60s and 70s here, updated. And I call this series the pie front, because the cover has sort of this circle with pie wedges with all different, a soup, a salad, a main dish, appetizer, a cake, of course, and but it was very, very popular. This is the one I remember my mom using growing up. And then on the inside is sort of this wonderful chart of herbs and spices, and it shows you the most common ones, and it goes across the back as well. And it shows you basically when you would want to use these, and what application would these be appropriate for different vegetables, meats, soups and stews, and things like that. And then, of course, they updated, these tabs are all updated, and they start with appetizers and beverages, and they go into breads and cakes and frostings and cookies and candies, desserts. They have eggs, cheese, rice and pasta, meat and poultry, main dishes, and then sort of at the back you have what they call special helps, which used to be at the front when they called it how-tos, but this is the updated 70s version of the Betty Crocker cookbook. And again, here is a hardcover edition, which you could also get. Now this one is a little bit later. This one is from 1980, but they were still making a hardcover issue. And by the way, again, this would have been 69, this would have been 1980. You can see we have a new and improved Betty on the back, sporting a little She looks a little bit more matronly, actually, in 1980. Her new hairdo, and but still in the red and white, in the style of the day. But this one, again, this is 1969. This is a new and revised edition, including microwave recipes. Well, you know, between 1969, 1971, and 1980, yeah, people went microwave oven crazy, and everybody was getting microwave ovens. So, of course, we need to include recipes that use a microwave oven. This series, by the way, was published by Golden Books, and you may remember Golden Books, or if you have children or grandchildren, because Golden is a big publisher of kids' books. Well, they published these Betty Crocker books as well during this period. Now, here is a spiral version of this book. This is 1983, Betty Crocker, still keeping with the orange theme, but check this, a new Betty Crocker, another one. So let's see, I'm going to try to put them all in the camera shot here. So there's the book, 3 books, 3 Bettys. How's that? Still beautiful, but updated again for 1983. Then I've got something a little bit more current. This one I think is from 1996. So here's one, and it is a hardcover edition, and it still has pretty much the same chapters as the old books, a lot of color photographs, some illustrations, and a lot of updated recipes reflecting kind of how we are eating now in 1996 as opposed to, 1950 or 60 or 70 or 80. So I think this is probably the newest version that I have. There are some recipes that made it through all the iterations of this cookbook, but a lot of them get updated and changed out. Now, I don't know if they're still doing this. This is a 1990. It looks like, oh, Kevin, you're back to the old book. Well, not really. This is a new book. This is from 1998, and it is a reproduction. It says here, the original 1950 classic edition, okay? So it's this book, reprinted. And you know it is because it's got a barcode and everything else on the back. And but I will say there's a notation in the front about how this is an updated version, and the recipes were printed exactly as they were, but please note, some techniques are different now, but like we don't eat as many raw eggs in things and stuff like that. We need to cook meats to certain temperatures where the old book didn't necessarily give those kinds of instructions. But other than that, it really is a very faithful reproduction of the original. So, sometimes the original books are fun to have, but they are literally falling apart from age and use. So if you wanted, I think you might still be able to get a reproduction of the original 1950. And then, of course, this cookbook, like Better Homes and Gardens, like Joy of Cooking, Pillsbury Cookbook, and many other classic cookbooks became available in paperback. And there, this one's got Betty on it. This one is from 1976, and you'll notice it's got that sort of pie front like our 1971 printed edition has. So this is a 1976 edition, but there's really no, they're not calling it a picture cookbook. There's actually no pictures in here, but it does have all the recipes. And then we have one here from 1986, and this is again no pictures, but a reprint of all the recipes. And how much was this book? $7.99. I don't know how much this one was at the time. Probably $5 or something like that. So again, not everybody could afford to get the deluxe big old ring binder or even the hardcover book, but they made a version of this affordable for people who only had a few dollars to spend. So that's always a good thing. And I did notice that the later edition, like 1996, there's no picture of Betty Crocker anywhere on this thing, or even inside that I could see. So I don't know if they're still putting her face on things or not. I don't have any copies from the 2000s, so if anybody has a recent copy of a new edition of the Betty Crocker cookbook, by all means, let me know. So, okay, we covered the Betty Crocker cookbook chronology a little bit. Again, I don't have every edition, but I have a few here in the library. Another go-to essential cookbook, and it is certainly a classic for a reason, because these books were in so many kitchens and taught so many people how to cook. And if you have a favorite recipe from the Betty Crocker book or a story about this book, do like you always do and share them with us, would you please, in the comments. Always love hearing from you. So, thank you for this edition of Time in the Cookbook Library here at the Cavalcade, and thanks for watching. There is a website. It's called cavalcadeoffood.com, and I invite you to go there and check it out. I invite you to subscribe if you are so inclined, and you'll get notified when new videos go up. Share, like, all that stuff. And I hope you're all well, and I will look forward to seeing you back here on Cavalcade of Food real soon. Bye, everybody.